Pumpkin in Istanbul. Pumpkin was not an ordinary cat. He was a small, bright orange creature with a tail that moved like a paintbrush and eyes that never stayed still. His fur looked like the sunset over the Bosphorus, warm, golden, and full of stories. And he talked a lot. Not with words humans could hear, of course, but with an inner voice that never stopped, a voice full of curiosity and dramatic opinions about almost everything. If he had been human, people would probably call him expressive. But as a cat, he was simply Pumpkin. Pumpkin lived in a quiet corner of Istanbul, close to the Bosphorus. His home was not a house or an apartment. Pumpkin belonged to the streets, free, independent, and proudly in control of his life. Still, he had many human friends who gave him food, warmth, and occasional scratches on the head. He liked to think of them not as owners, but as clients. After all, he was the one choosing where to go, whom to visit, and when to leave. Freedom meant everything to him. Every day in Istanbul started with the same gentle routine. Pumpkin woke up on a small stone wall near the water. From there, he could see the Bosphorus stretching in front of him like a moving painting. Blue waves, white boats, and a sky that changed colors every hour. The air smelled like salt and wet stone, mixed with the aroma of ciment from the street sellers. It was a smell that Pumpkin believed belonged only to Istanbul. You could not find it anywhere else in the world. This morning was no different. Pumpkin opened his eyes slowly, stretched his long body, and let out a small, satisfied sound. Another day in my city, he thought. Let's see what Istanbul wants to show me today. He jumped down from the wall and started walking along the shore. The seagulls were already awake, noisy, chaotic, and always hungry. Pumpkin did not like seagulls. They were too loud, too dramatic, and always tried to take food from cats. One of them flew low and shouted as if giving a speech. "Cow, caw-caw!" Pumpkin narrowed his eyes. "Yes, yes, good morning to you too, Captain Screamy," he thought. "Always shouting, no manners." He continued walking, tail up in the air like he owned the entire Bosphorus. And in a way, he did. At least that's what Pumpkin believed. As he reached the first small cafe by the water, the owner, an old man named Hakan, bent down and smiled. "Pumpkin, my little prince, come here." Pumpkin liked Hakan. He was slow-moving, gentle, and most importantly, generous with food. Hakan placed a small plate of cheese and olives on the ground. Pumpkin sniffed the olives and frowned inside. Why do humans think cats eat olives? But the cheese, now that was perfect. After breakfast, Pumpkin sat by the water for a moment. Ferries were leaving the pier in Besiktas, their horns echoing across the water. People were rushing to work, walking fast with coffee cups, talking on the phone, checking their watches. Pumpkin watched them with interest. Humans are funny, he thought. Always running. Running to work, running home, running to catch a ferry. Maybe they enjoy it. He swished his tail thoughtfully. Me? I prefer walking. Slowly. After finishing his thoughts about human behavior, Pumpkin decided it was time to start his daily exploration. Today he wanted to walk deeper into the city. He felt that something special was waiting for him, something he could not name yet. His whiskers tingled, a good sign. Pumpkin always trusted his whiskers. He started walking toward Karakoy, taking the long path by the water. The morning sun was warm on his fur, and the wind carried the soft smell of the sea. He passed fishermen sitting on low stools, their fishing lines disappearing into the water. Some of them looked down and smiled at him. One of them, a man with thick eyebrows, dropped a small piece of fish. "Here, little one." Pumpkin sniffed it, fresh, soft, delicious. Respect, he thought proudly, a human with taste. After a few more bites, Pumpkin continued his journey. Soon the path widened and he arrived near the Galata Bridge. Cars passed above him, boats moved under him, and humans walked all around him. For Pumpkin, this place was like a giant stage. Everything was moving, life, sound, color. He walked confidently up the steps and crossed the bridge. The smell of fish filled the air again. Vendors shouted prices, people laughed, tourists took photos. Pumpkin passed through the crowd like a small orange cloud, soft and silent. A little girl saw him and gasped. "Look, Mommy, look, a beautiful cat." Pumpkin paused. He liked compliments. The girl bent down and stretched her hand. Pumpkin let her pet him twice, just twice, and then continued walking. Children are sweet, he thought, but the energy, too much. As he walked further, the great silhouette of the Galata Tower appeared in the distance. Tall, ancient, standing proudly above the city, Pumpkin loved that tower. It was one of his favorite places in Istanbul. He always felt something magical about it. Maybe it was the shape, maybe the history, or maybe the fact that pigeons liked to gather there. And pigeons. Well, Pumpkin enjoyed chasing pigeons, not catching them. He was too polite for that. Just chasing them enough to make them fly in a dramatic cloud. He reached the narrow streets leading to Galata. The smells changed here. Fresh coffee, pastries, warm bread, perfumes from small boutiques. Humans walked slower in these streets, looking at shops, laughing with friends, drinking Turkish coffee in small cups. Pumpkin's paws made soft sounds on the old stone ground. The buildings rose high around him, with hanging lights and colorful street art. He felt the story of the city under his paws. Hundreds of years, thousands of people, millions of footsteps. When he reached Galata Tower, he sat under its shadow. The pigeons saw him and immediately flew up into the air. Yes, you can relax, Pumpkin thought. I'm not in the mood today. Maybe later. From Galata, Pumpkin decided to walk toward Sultanahmet. It was a long walk, but Pumpkin enjoyed long walks, especially when they led to places filled with history. He crossed the Galata Bridge again and entered the old streets leading toward Eminönü. Spice shops, simit sellers, tourists with maps, men carrying heavy boxes on their backs. Everything moved like a river of life. This city never sleeps, Pumpkin thought, even during the day. When he reached Sultanahmet Square, he stopped. The air here felt different, quieter, more ancient. Pumpkin looked around slowly. There stood the great Hagia Sophia, massive, beautiful, timeless. Its warm-colored stone walls glowed under the sunlight, and next to it, the blue mosque rose with its tall, elegant minarets, stretching into the sky like poetry carved into stone. Pumpkin had seen these places many times, but they always made him feel small in a good way. He loved the huge open square, the sound of the wind passing through the trees, and the soft echo of footsteps on the marble paths. He walked between the two historical giants, listening to the murmurs of tourists and the cooing of pigeons. If only humans could hear what these buildings say, Pumpkin thought. So many years, so many stories, so many secrets. As he passed near Hagia Sophia, an old woman selling chestnuts smiled at him. "Hello, my beautiful ginger cat," she said softly. Pumpkin approached her. She always gave him a tiny piece of chestnut, warm, sweet, soft. Pumpkin closed his eyes for a moment. Delicious, he thought. Humans who cook, I admire them. After the snack, Pumpkin sat in the middle of the square and watched people. A couple was taking photos. A group of tourists was listening to a guide. A man was drawing Hagia Sophia in a sketchbook. A child was blowing bubbles into the air. Pumpkin felt the gentle wind move through his fur. "This city is alive," he whispered inside, "and I am part of it." He stayed there for a while, enjoying the warm sun and the peaceful energy around him. But soon, a strange feeling touched him, like a string inside his chest pulling gently. A feeling that said, "Go, something is waiting." Pumpkin stood up. He didn't know what he was looking for. He didn't know where he was going. But he trusted his whiskers. He always did. He walked down a narrow street behind the Blue Mosque. The street was quiet, lined with old houses and small gardens. The shadows of leaves danced on the walls. Pumpkin stopped suddenly. He felt something unusual, a sound, very soft, very small. A tiny mew. Pumpkin's ears turned sharply. Another mew. And another. He followed the sound until he reached a small wooden gate. Behind it, in the corner of a tiny garden, something moved. A tiny kitten. Gray, shaking, scared, alone. Pumpkin blinked slowly. Well, today just became interesting. The kitten looked at him with huge, frightened eyes. Pumpkin took one small step forward. "Don't worry, little one," he thought gently. "I found you." And just like that, Pumpkin's peaceful day in Istanbul turned into the beginning of a new adventure. Pumpkin stood still for a moment, letting the soft breeze brush through his fur as he watched the tiny gray kitten trembling in the corner of the small garden. The garden was quiet, hidden between old wooden houses with faded paint and climbing vines. It felt like time moved slower here, far from the crowded Sultanahmet Square. The kitten's big eyes reflected fear, confusion, and a silent question. "Am I safe?" Pumpkin took a slow step forward, his tail raised gently to show he meant no harm. "Easy there, little cloud," he thought with a soft tone. "I'm not here to scare you." The kitten made a tiny sound. Mew. Pumpkin tilted his head. Maybe you're hungry, or lonely, or both. Probably both. I know the look. He remembered himself as a younger cat, a small, curious kitten wandering the streets of Istanbul, learning which humans were kind and which doors were safe to sleep beside. The memory warmed him. He knew exactly how this gray kitten felt. Pumpkin stepped closer and sat in front of the kitten, leaving enough space so the small one wouldn't feel trapped. The kitten looked at him again, still trembling. Pumpkin slowly blinked. In cat language, that meant, "It's okay. I'm here." The kitten blinked back only once, but that was enough. Good, Pumpkin thought. Trust, that's how all adventures begin. Pumpkin looked around. There was no sign of a mother cat, no other kittens, just the gray little one, alone in the corner. He sniffed the air, listening for any familiar sound. Nothing. "All right," he said inside. "Looks like you're with me today." He gently touched the kitten's head with his nose. The kitten relaxed slightly, though still confused. Pumpkin stood up and looked toward the wooden gate. "Come on," he thought. "The city is big, but I know the safe spots." The kitten didn't move. Pumpkin sighed dramatically inside. Yes. This is going to take patience." He walked a few steps toward the gate, then turned his head and waited. Slowly, very slowly, the little kitten stood up and took its first shaky step toward Pumpkin. Then another, and another. Pumpkin's tail moved with pride. That's it. Small paws, big courage. Together they left the tiny garden and stepped back onto the old stone street behind the Blue Mosque. The sun was now higher, warming the city with rich golden light. Pumpkin walked in front, confident and steady, like a small orange tour guide. The kitten followed closely, still nervous but trusting. Pumpkin decided to take him to a safer place first, somewhere quiet where the kitten could rest and get some food. Pumpkin knew all the good spots in Istanbul. As they walked through the narrow streets, Pumpkin thought to himself, "I didn't plan this. I just wanted a calm day, some snacks, maybe a nap by the Bosphorus. But life likes surprises." He looked back at the kitten. A tiny surprise, but still a surprise. They slowly made their way through Sultanahmet's smaller alleys, away from the busy crowds. Pumpkin guided the kitten toward Gulhane Park, a peaceful green area where cats often slept in the shade of big trees. When they reached the park's entrance, the kitten looked up at the tall trees and wide open space with wonder. His fear seemed to soften, replaced by curiosity. Pumpkin felt proud. Good, you're starting to see the beauty. Inside the park, birds sang above them, and sunlight filtered through the leaves like golden rain. Pumpkin led the kitten to a quiet corner near a stone bench where an old gardener often sat. Right on time, the old man appeared. He always carried food in a small cloth bag for the cats. He saw Pumpkin first. "Ah, my orange king," he said warmly. Then he noticed the kitten. "Oh, and who is this little gentleman?" Pumpkin sat tall. "He's with me," he thought proudly. The gardener put small pieces of chicken on the ground. The kitten sniffed them and ate slowly, still unsure but clearly hungry. Pumpkin ate beside him, calm, controlled, like a big brother showing how things worked. After eating, the kitten curled near Pumpkin, exhausted from fear and walking. Pumpkin sighed softly. "So small. The city must feel huge to you." He looked at the trees swaying above. "But don't worry. Istanbul teaches gently, and sometimes loudly." Pumpkin licked the kitten's head once. The kitten purred, a tiny, shaky purr, but a purr nonetheless. Pumpkin closed his eyes. "Good. You're safe here." But Pumpkin was not the type to stay still for long. After the kitten rested, Pumpkin decided it was time to show him more of the world. Istanbul was too big, too alive, too beautiful to hide in a corner. Pumpkin stood up. The kitten opened his eyes and lifted his tiny head. "Mew!" Pumpkin flicked his tail. Yes, come, I'll show you something special." He led the kitten toward the exit of the park. They passed the old stone walls, the museum entrance, and soon reached Sirkeci, the historical heart where trains and ferries met. The streets were buzzing with life, cars honking, people shouting, tourists laughing, vendors calling out prices. To the kitten, it looked overwhelming. To Pumpkin, it looked like home. "Welcome to the real Istanbul," Pumpkin said inside proudly. They turned toward the coastline, and suddenly the city opened up, the Bosphorus stretching wide and shimmering under the midday sun. Boats crossed the water like moving stars. The wind carried the smell of the sea, crisp and refreshing. The kitten's eyes widened. Pumpkin smiled inside. "I know, it's beautiful." They walked along the shore, passing fishermen with long lines reaching into the water. One of them recognized Pumpkin. "There he is! The Orange Captain!" He tossed a tiny piece of fish. Pumpkin ate it gracefully. The kitten watched. The fisherman laughed softly and dropped a smaller piece. "There you go, little sailor." The kitten tasted fish for the first time ever. His eyes sparkled. Pumpkin nodded. Fresh fish. A true Istanbul experience. As they continued along the shore, the Galata Tower rose again in the distance, watching over the city like an old guardian. Pumpkin felt something stir inside him, a feeling that said, "Today is not just a normal day." And he was right, because as they reached Karakoy Pier, Pumpkin saw someone unusual, a tall man with a black coat standing still, looking across the water toward Üsküdar. He wasn't eating. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't in a hurry. He was simply waiting. Pumpkin slowed down. The kitten bumped into him slightly. Pumpkin stared at the man. Something about him felt different, strange, important. Pumpkin's whiskers twitched. The man slowly turned his head and looked directly at Pumpkin. His eyes were calm but sharp, like someone who carried many secrets. Pumpkin felt a small electric spark run through him, not of fear but of recognition, as if their paths were meant to cross. The man smiled for a moment, then whispered softly, "Hello, Pumpkin." Pumpkin froze. How does he know my name? The kitten pressed closer to Pumpkin's leg, sensing his tension. The man turned away again, looking across the Bosphorus, as if he hadn't said anything strange. Pumpkin felt the wind shift. Something was beginning. A new thread in the story of Istanbul, a mystery hidden behind the waves, and Pumpkin, bright, bold, curious Pumpkin, was standing right at the edge of it. He lifted his tail, alert and determined. "All right," he thought. "Let's see where this leads." And beside him, the tiny kitten took a shaky step forward. The adventure was no longer Pumpkin's alone. Pumpkin stared at the tall man in the black coat for a long moment. The Bosphorus wind brushed against Pumpkin's whiskers, but he didn't move. The kitten pressed close to his side, trembling, unsure if they should stay or run. Pumpkin didn't run. He never ran from curiosity. The man kept looking toward Üsküdar, as if searching for something far beyond the water. For a moment, the world around them grew strangely quiet. The sound of ferry horns, the seagulls, the footsteps. Everything faded just a little. Pumpkin tilted his head. How did he know my name? Humans almost never knew Pumpkin's name unless someone told them. But this man, Pumpkin had never seen him before. The man finally turned again. This time he crouched down slowly, like he didn't want to frighten the small kitten beside Pumpkin. His coat moved gently with the wind, and his eyes, deep brown, calm, observant, focused on Pumpkin. He extended a hand. "Hello, Pumpkin," he repeated in a smooth voice. "I've been waiting to see you." Pumpkin's tail flicked sharply. "Waiting? For me? What does that even mean?" The kitten hid behind Pumpkin's leg, peeking out with fear. Pumpkin stepped forward, one step, then another. His nose reached the man's hand. Pumpkin smelled the sea, the cold, old paper, and something like stories, not food, not danger. Stories. The man smiled very softly. "You're even smarter than they said." Pumpkin blinked. "Who is they?" Before Pumpkin could wonder more, a sudden loud sound broke the moment, the horn of a ferry approaching the pier. The man stood up, brushed the dust from his coat, and checked his watch. "It's time," he said. He turned and walked toward the ferry that had just opened its ramp. Pumpkin sat completely still. The kitten looked up at him. "Mew?" Pumpkin kept staring at the ferry. "Time for what?" The tall man stepped onto the boat, but before disappearing inside, he looked back one last time, straight at Pumpkin. He mouthed the words, "Follow the wind." Then he was gone. The ferry horn echoed across the Bosphorus, and the boat began to move. Pumpkin felt something electric inside his chest, a spark that came only at the beginning of an adventure, a feeling bigger than curiosity, bigger than fear, bigger than the city itself. The kitten touched Pumpkin's tail nervously. Mew? Pumpkin looked down at him. All right, he thought. I guess we're going. He stood up, tail high, eyes sharp, and he ran. Not away, but forward, toward the mystery, toward the adventure. The kitten followed, small paws tapping quickly on the stone ground. They didn't try to chase the ferry. It was too far now. Instead, Pumpkin headed toward the Galata Bridge again, moving fast through crowds. His movements were graceful but full of purpose. Every turn, every jump, every step felt like he was following an invisible line, something guiding him. The kitten tried his best to keep up, his tiny legs moving as fast as they could. Along the bridge, fishermen looked down at the two cats racing by. "Hey, Pumpkin! What's the hurry?" one of them asked. Pumpkin didn't answer. He was too focused. "Follow the wind," the man had said. Pumpkin lifted his head. The Bosphorus wind was blowing from the north today, carrying the smell of salt, metal, and rain. Pumpkin followed it. The wind led them to the other side of the bridge, down the steps into Karakoy's colorful, lively streets. Shops with bright signs, cafes filled with people, the sound of laughing and clinking glasses. It all blurred as Pumpkin passed quickly. The kitten struggled. Pumpkin slowed down for a moment. "Stay close," he told him silently. The kitten nodded with a shaking mew. Together they moved until the busy streets opened into a wide square near the tram station. Pumpkin stopped. The wind changed direction. It blew toward Tufan, toward the hills, toward the narrow streets that climbed like stairs into the heart of old Istanbul. Pumpkin's heart beat faster. "We're close," he thought. "I don't know to what, but we're close." He followed the wind up the steep streets. The kitten panted softly but didn't give up. Pumpkin admired his courage. Finally, they reached a quiet alley. The wind stopped completely, like it was holding its breath. Pumpkin froze. At the end of the alley was a small wooden door, old, dark, carved with shapes that looked like waves and stars, something ancient, something important. Pumpkin stepped toward it slowly. The kitten hesitated. Pumpkin turned. "It's okay," he said in his inner voice. "We go together." The kitten took a brave step. Pumpkin touched the bottom of the door with his paw. It opened, by itself, without a sound. Behind it was a long staircase leading down, dim, quiet, lit only by soft golden lamps on the walls. Pumpkin felt fear. But stronger than fear, he felt calling. He stepped inside. The kitten followed close behind. The door closed silently behind them. Step by step they went down. The air changed. Cooler, older, filled with the smell of books and dust and secrets. At the bottom of the stairs was a huge underground room. Pumpkin's eyes widened. It was a library, not a normal one, a secret one. Shelves of old books, scrolls, maps, artifacts, objects from different centuries, stories waiting in the dark. Pumpkin's whiskers twitched wildly. Then he heard footsteps. The tall man in the black coat stepped into the warm light. "Welcome, Pumpkin," he said gently. "And you too, little one." Pumpkin stood tall, chest forward. "Tell me," he thought sharply, "what is this place?" As if he heard Pumpkin's thoughts, the man spoke. "This is the Library of Forgotten Paths," he said, "a place only cats can enter." Pumpkin blinked. The man knelt down. "Pumpkin, every street cat in Istanbul carries a story, but you—" He touched Pumpkin's head gently. "You carry many." Pumpkin felt something warm in his chest, a strange recognition, as if the city itself breathed inside him. You were not chosen by accident, the man continued. You understand the city. You listen to it. You read its whispers. He stood. Istanbul needs a guide for its forgotten paths and a protector for its lost voices. He looked at the kitten. And he will need a teacher. Pumpkin's heart shook. A teacher? Me? The man smiled. Pumpkin, this is your story now. A new life, a new path, a new purpose. The kitten leaned against Pumpkin's leg, small and trusting. Pumpkin lifted his head proudly. Then we begin, he said silently. The man nodded. Good, because the city is calling. And tonight, the Bosphorus will bring the first sign. Pumpkin felt the wind return, brushing his fur even in the underground room. The adventure had only begun. Pumpkin looked at the kitten. Ready? The kitten mewed softly. And together, under the ancient city of Istanbul, the two cats stepped into a new chapter. Not just a walk through Istanbul, but a journey through its hidden heart. A journey that would continue far beyond this day. A new adventure was waiting. And Pumpkin, the bright orange cat with a loud, talkative heart, was finally ready for it.